How
Yeah.
is this going to work? What are we going to do in this episode? You're the wizard that figured this whole thing out. So explain it. Let's do it.
Yes, I put together a complex algorithm of just reversing the point system and assigning the ones. So you sent me a ranking. So you're number one, I assigned 7 points. You're number seven, I assigned 1 point. And then I
So
put my
what?
ranking in, and so added them all up. And so what I'm going to do is just go. We have a
So
last
just
album. Yeah.
so just for clarity's sake, we are reviewing and ranking the '80s Priest albums, and we're including Painkiller in with that because it just seems to fit well in the '80s, even though it came out in 1990. It's the
Yeah,
last with Rob for a while. So okay,
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So in last place with one person putting it second to last, and John and Jay, you put it last, is Ram It Down. Jay, what's your information? Give us the basic details of Ram It Down.
All right. Well, came out in 1988, produced by Tom Allen, went gold. In UK, it charted at number 24, in Canada, number 30, in the US, number 31. So this album was actually meant to be part of a double album called Twin Turbos, along with the album Turbo, of course. Four songs that were written for the Twin Turbos project ended up making it on Ram It Down, including the title track, also Hard as Iron, Monsters of Rock, and Love You to Death. So Tom Allen produced this album uh, as well. And one of the quotes he gave Martin Popoff in Martin's book is, "The drums were essentially written by Glenn, Kenny, and Rob."
Mhm.
So just like on Turbo, Glenn and KK got new toys called synthesized guitars. Well, now they got a fun new toy called a drum machine that runs off a keyboard. Um, so Judas Priest and producer Tom Allen were kind of evasive as to how much Dave Holland actually played on the record. Of course, Dave Holland has said it was 100% drum machine, which seems to be the consensus. Not surprisingly, this would be drummer Dave Holland's final record with Priest. The story goes that Dave was fed up with touring and living out of a suitcase, which was probably true. But when you dig deeper, you find out that he had a lot of animosity towards Glenn Tipton, joined the club there, for orchestrating the whole drum machine thing. So, and this is one of the things in Priest lore that you don't really get a straight up answer from anybody on, except for Dave Holland. You know, some say, well, he played a couple licks here and there, or he was on a certain song, but I don't hear it. It's 100% drum machine, um, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as history says. So I'm going to stick with that. So Ram It Down, yeah, 1988. That's a little story about Ram It Down.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
So I
how
agree.
did
I think it's all drum machine. I don't think there's any live drums on there whatsoever.
Yeah.
Uh, John, what is your memory of Ram It Down?
Well, I had bailed on Priest after Turbo. I bought
Understandable.
Turbo and I didn't really like it. I remember isn't that the one with the picture on the inside where they're like in the bright kind of outfits and I might be confusing
yeah,
this
yeah.
with Somewhere in Time. Whereas the guys in Somewhere in Time, they've got like motorcycles, the Iron Maiden guy. I don't know. There's a terrible picture on the inside of
Yes.
Turbo.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what the props are. It's a terrible picture. The
Yeah.
haircuts are terrible.
Yep.
Just everything. And it was just like, I'm done with this. So I didn't even buy Ram It Down till probably when I started buying Judas Priest on CD, so not till the 90s, maybe, the mid to late 90s. And I never liked it. I think it sounds terrible. I know that it's supposed to be some sort of correction, like, oh, Turbo was the more poppy songs. Ram It Down is the more metal songs. I'll say that Ram It Down was my, out of the seven, my number seven. So obviously I like Turbo better than Ram It Down. I just think it's terrible. I think the guitars sound terrible. I think the drums sound horrible. I mean, they're obviously a drum machine and they're buried so far in the back that it just sounds terrible. The songs are awful. Blood Red Skies, though, I do really like Blood Red Skies, although I think it works better live. But there's just all these hard. Ram It Down isn't that bad either. I kind of like Ram It Down. But stuff like Love Zone is just embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm a rocker. I mean, that sounds like a title that you'd get off of a modern AC/DC record. I'm a rocker. Like, how does
Yeah.
that even get? That's what you write on the tape. When, what should we call this? I don't know. Just write "I'm a rocker" and we'll come up with a good title later. You
It's
know,
definitely a placeholder title.
it's horrible. And Johnny B. Good is just to me the bottom of the barrel. And I know that everybody said, "Oh, it was supposed to be in a movie, and they didn't take it for the movie, or did it get in a movie? I don't know. Who cares?" But
Yeah.
the point is it's on a Judas Priest record. I don't know the backstory of it. It's just on a Judas Priest record, and it sounds horrible. And for a band that was known for doing really creative covers like Green Manalishi and Diamonds and Rust, this is just horrible. And I can't even remember some of these songs like Love You to Death, Monsters of Rock. I can't stand when metal bands sing about heavy metal. So you've got a
Right.
song called Heavy Metal, which is just,
Yeah.
ah, no, this album just
The
doesn't work for me. Never listen to it, never like it, can't. I've tried. It just does nothing for me. If I had to give it a ranking out of 10, I'd probably give it like a 2 or something out of 10. And that's only because of Blood Red Skies and maybe Ram It Down.
Yeah.
there's
The
an
story.
incredible Tipton solo on heavy metal that I that saves that really bad song from being absolutely terrible is Tipton solo on heavy metal.
And you got to wonder why they certainly at this time had a budget. Turbo was a very successful record for them. I think it went platinum back then. So they certainly had a budget. So for them to use a drum machine, and it's not like I don't inherently have anything against drum machines. I'm very much into dark wave and goth music and stuff like that, which a lot of that is, I love Nine Inch Nails and things like that. But when you're using it as, this just sounds like they're trying to replace the drummer. Like they're not doing anything with it that they're writing a sci-fi record and they wanted it to sound really robotic and cold. That was the atmosphere they were going for. No,
Right.
this just sounds like lame. It's not even good drum programming. The drum machine isn't even mixed very well. It's mixed like it sounds like it's 100 miles away, drenched in reverb. Snare drum sounds horrible. So it's just, why would they do this? I'm sure they had the budget. It's just puzzling and baffling. It's not like Mutt Lang with Def Leppard. They say that pyromania is the kick in the snare or a machine, and the cymbals and some of the fills are drums. They say that. I don't know what's true or not. Hysteria, they say the same thing, but at least the drums sound good, somewhat good on
Right.
those records for if they are machines, half human. But here it just sounds horrible.
Yeah. It's awful. And one of the things I read in Rob Halford's book, and this seems to be where you get the most truth in Confess. He said that it was basically a skill thing. Dave Holland, didn't do the double bass, kick on the drums. He refused to do it, didn't know how to do it. And Rob, after coming off of the soft turbo, he wanted to kind of get the metal, back in the album. So he felt that he needed at least some double kick. So he says that in his book. There are some other things I read in Martin's book that are really vague from the rest of the band. Um, but I think that the truth is that Rob kind of wanted to up it a little bit. as far as
And
the
that
sound.
didn't work, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that was a misstep. Yeah, speaking of missteps, you're talking about Johnny Be Good, and what's interesting is the album before Turbo, the album before this, Turbo, um, has a song called Reckless on it. It's the last song on the album, one of my favorite songs on Turbo, and a movie called Top Gun
Hmm.
approached Priest management and wanted to use Reckless in the soundtrack. And Priest management and all their, smarts, and they discussed it with the band as well. Well, they didn't trust the movie. They, looked at the script and thought it was going to be a bomb, going to be a failure. Didn't know who Tom Cruise was. Said, "Yeah, we don't want to be any part of this." So they turned down having Reckless on the
Uh-huh.
soundtrack of Top Gun. So they didn't want that to happen again. So they got approached a year later with the producers of a movie called Johnny Be Good and said, "Hey, do you want to write a song um, for this movie? It'll be the title track, Johnny Be Good." Um, so they jumped on it. They didn't want to make the same mistake twice because by that time Top Gun had come out,
Yeah.
and they realized their mistake. So they jumped on it and made that horrible, horrible song "Johnny Be Good," and it ended up the movie flopped, and nobody even knows about it anymore. It was just the biggest flop movie ever in history. So it's an interesting story there. But
I did a
yeah,
video on my channel, horrible cover versions, cover songs. And of course, this was on it right there with like Leader of the Pack, Twisted Sister's
oh,
version of
right,
Leader
right.
of the Pack. Just these like terrible career decisions. So, yep.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I have really nothing more to excuse me, nothing more to add. The drum machine just killed it. I remember getting it uh in '88. I just graduated high school, got the cassette, real excited. Hopefully some redemption for Priest after the Turbo debacle. And I just hated it. I mean, the the drum machine on, I mean, you get through Ram It Down, the title track, you get heavy metal, which has, like Jeff was saying, the cool KK solo, and you can tell it's a drum machine, and but you might let it slide. But then the beginning of Love Zone, oh my God, with the drum machine on the beginning of Love Zone, the third song on the album. So
Yeah.
that kicks in, and you're just like, oh, I'm done, because that sounds so mechanical and so fake. Yeah, I was done after that one. So that was our collective number 7,
Yep. So I
correct?
had
All
it
right.
slightly above Turbo, and I think this might just be a experience thing. My introduction to Priest was Painkiller. Next album I got was Turbo. It was a sucker punch. I knew Ram It Down was bad, and I don't think I listened to it probably till like 2004 or something, just because I knew it was bad. So going in, I had very low expectations. Blood Red Skies is an incredible track. It's very good live. Um, the drum machine does is a big distraction, but it doesn't it going into it, I wasn't sucker punched like I was by Turbo. So that's probably why I have Turbo last and you guys have Ram It Down last. Speaking of, Turbo is our next one.
Mhm.
Again, you guys have it second to last. I have it last. Jay, tell us about Turbo.
Turbo 1986, Judas Priest's 10th studio album. Of course, Tom Allom uh, produced all the records throughout the '80s except Painkiller. Uh, Debuted number 17 on Billboard in the US, number 33 UK. Went platinum. Turbo Lover was the single. This album was originally meant to be a double album, like we were talking about, called Twin Turbos, but the record company scrapped that idea. Priest gave in kind of to the glam of the time from the colored leather, like you were talking about, John, the different colored leather look they had, the frizzed out hair. um, to really the dumbing down of the songs. Glenn and KK were fascinated with the new technology of the time, guitars, synthesized guitars, and the band used Sony Digital to record the album for the first time, which is cool. By this time, Rob Halford was an admitted cocaine addict and alcoholic. He was struggling with being a gay man and feeling the need to stay in the closet for the sake of Judas Priest. It was really coming to a head. He's in a very unstable relationship. In fact, Rob was hospitalized in November of 1985 after a drunken attempt at suicide with a Percodan overdose. Then in January of 86, his love interest committed suicide with a gun after a cocaine-fueled fight with Rob. Rob went into rehab after that. He's been clean and sober ever since. Um, but the album sold really well with heavy radio play of the song Turbo Lover and the MTV video for Turbo Lover and also Locked In, which is a really fun video. I don't know if you guys have seen the
Hmm.
Locked In video. Yeah, that's a trip. I love that one. Um, with the Twinkie and everything. It's a lot to get into. It's, uh, I remember really not actually buying this record upon its release. My good friend did buy it, and he liked it. I wasn't impressed. I'm like a sophomore, junior in high school. Um, he liked a couple songs. And it's kind of grown on me. When it first came out, I wasn't into it at all. I wasn't into the sound. I wasn't into the look. I thought they were selling out, but it has grown on me. The Fuel for Life tour is also the first time I ever saw Priest at Stelland Arena in Fresno, California. Um, it's kind of the lyrics are kind of the problem with it. The synth guitars, now that I'm older, I accept them. I have no problem with that. But it's just the dumbed down lyrics. Um, it's real simplistic. Um, the lyrics are. It's kind of a good time rock and roll teenage angst album, type thing. It's real bright in the production, and it seems like something you'd listen to, around a campfire or inner tubing down a slow river or something, or just a good time rock and roll fun album. But the lyrics are awful. Rob admittedly didn't put full effort into the lyrics. Like I was saying, he was having issues in his personal life. He was an alcoholic and a cocaine addict, and he admits that he didn't really put the effort into the album that he should have. And it really shows. Um, it's yeah, I don't really want to crap on it, but um, it's not
No,
one
pass
of
it to me.
my.
I'll
Yeah,
start. I'll take over.
okay. We'll let Jeff crap.
I'm actually not going to shit on it too bad. It's a bad album. It's every band has one. If you've put out 20 something albums, even if you put out 10 albums, you're gonna have one that's just a dud. Locked In is a decent song. It's not as good as Blood Red Skies. It's a decent song. It and I know I'm coming into it with that. Every time I think of Turbo, I think of that sucker punch of I was living in the Bay Area. I had just gone to Tower Records. Uh, Turbo was the album closest to Painkiller in time that I found, so I pick it up. My mom's driving me home. I'm putting it in the tape deck in the car, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? So, I literally ejected it and looked at it and make sure I didn't get like the wrong tape in somebody didn't mix in a Duran Duran tape or something in there. I would have preferred a Duran Duran tape, to be honest. All right. So, John, what's your memories of Turbo?
Yeah, just kind of like what you said. I mean, I didn't come from it from Painkiller, but I came in from Defenders of the Faith, and uh, it was just shocking. I thought it was horrible. I was already starting to get tired, a little tired of heavy metal, and this was like you said, you ejected the tape from your tape player. Well, I ejected myself from Judas Priest, parachuted out of the crashing airplane. Uh, Yeah, I hate the mix. The synths actually don't bother me. The sound of the guitars is so brittle and just like bright on this album. It's really tough. That said, I really love Turbo Lover. I always liked Turbo Lover. I think I love that song. I think it's a good example of I think what they were trying to do with this era is write more radio friendly stuff, melodic stuff. uh, it sounds like a drum machine on Turbo Lover. I don't know if it isn't, it's Dave Holland trying to sound like a drum machine. So you could have had a
Yeah.
drum machine on this song, and I don't think it would have made any major difference. But it works, and it works because it's kind of a cool song title, a weird like Turbo Lover. What is this? It's a little futuristic sounding. Uh, the song lends itself to a kind of straight robotic type beat. The chorus is really good. The lyrics are kind of engaging. You're kind of like, what are these lyrics about? So they could have written sort of this intelligent 3 to 4 minute songs using modern technology, and it could have worked. Sort of works on Locked In, but unfortunately, instead of going in this direction of what you get in Turbo, you get stuff like Parental Guidance in Private Property and Rock You All Around the World, which sounds like it could have been on a Scorpions, 80 Scorpions record.
Exactly right.
Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days. What a dreadful title. This is like I expect a title like that from mid to late 80s Kiss, when Kiss was trying to cash their hair metal checks. It's just terrible. And this is the band that brought us Dissonant Aggressor and Beyond the Realms of Death and Screaming for Vengeance and The Sentinel. And now we've resorted to, we're rubbing shoulders with the Scorpions and I love the Scorpions. I love Blackout, but they were another band that saw the money, the brass ring on the merry-go-round there, and during the mid '80s, and just had to grab it for the money. Reckless is good. Hot for Love is horrible. I mean, just the song titles and the lyrics. And I'm a sucker for melodic stuff. I like to say I'm the guy in the room that loves Since You've Been Gone from Rainbows Down to Earth. So I love big hooks. I love melodic poppy type stuff. I don't particularly like it mixed in with my Judas Priest. Uh, so Parental Guidance, it's a very catchy song, but it's almost cringy because at this point, I mean, how old is Rob Halford at this point? Late 20s, 30, something like that.
Mhm.
It's like it's like he's the goofball in the room, that old guy in the room that shows up at a party with kids, a Kager, high school Kager party. And everybody's looking at this guy like, what are you doing? You shouldn't you have graduated college 8 years, 6 years ago or something like that? Why
Yeah.
are you still hanging? And the lyrics are just so dumb. It's so embarrassing that it's just shocking that there was no, again, they could have done Turbo and they're not talking about Beyond the Realms of Death and monsters like you get on Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders. So it gets away from that a little bit. But to me, it's an intelligent song. The lyrics are pretty good. The melody line is great. The feel of the song kind of works with the robotic thing and the synthesizers and everything that they were going for. So why didn't they kind of do it with Locked In, but then they just go off the rails and just go for the cheap thrills and stuff like Private Property, get your hands off my private. I mean, come on,
Ugh,
get
yeah.
it. and just parental guidance. I just can't get over that when I just see Rob on stage in that video, you know, with your three-piece suit, don't just go away. It's just it's just horrible, man. It's just absolutely, it's just bad. So it's unfortunate. And I was already getting a little fatigued with metal and Judas Priest in general. And so when this happened, I pressed eject and I just dove away from it and didn't come back to it. And it's not that I hated it, again, I kind of, and I've actually revisited this record. I got it not that long ago on CD, the original CD pressing of it. And again, there's some things on it that I was kind of surprised. I was like, hey, out in the cold, that's great. I really love that. Reckless, like you guys mentioned, Reckless is pretty good. So it isn't locked in, is Turbo Lover. It isn't all horrible, but man, the moments that are bad are just embarrassing bad. I'd rather see them uh, do something experimental, or there's like Nostradamus. That to me is at least them trying to push a boundary, this to me is just, they're just trying to cash in on what's happening at the time. And it's just embarrassing and doesn't work.
Yeah.
I
Sorry,
think.
Turbo. Sorry for any Turbo fans out
All right.
there,
Well,
So
but
those two, we're a consensus bottom two. The next one is Point of Entry. Jay, you were highest on this one at fourth. Me and
right.
John agreed it was the fifth best. So why do you think it's fourth, Jay?
Uh, I like it. Just to give a little preview, it came out in 1981, number 42 in Canada, number 14 in UK, number 39 in the US charts. It was gold. Judas Priest had finally made it after the success of British Steel. They were the biggest metal band in the world. The record company loved the success and the money so much from Living After Midnight and Breaking the Law. The band says they were under a lot of pressure by the label to repeat the commercial success of British Steel. So they went into the studio with that in mind. And this was to prove a mistake. And if I am frank, with hindsight, I think we should have gone back to Ringo's place. And that's Rob Halford talking about Ibiza. In Ibiza, there were too many distractions, says Rob. Rob's talking about Ibiza Studio in Ibiza, Spain. It's one of a number of vacation islands off the Mediterranean coast. In 1980, Priest was riding high, like I said, coming off the success of British Steel. Um, Ibiza is situated in this old farmhouse, way up a treacherous driveway, very difficult to get to. And the German owner of the studio was constantly having financial difficulties, and subsequently, the studio kept running out of diesel fuel. They needed the diesel fuel to run the generators that powered the studio. So it's way up there. Um, all that being said, Priest had a blast recording point of entry. Rob says, I don't know if all of the band would agree, but for me, Priest lost their way making the album that would become Point of Entry. They lost their way badly. So this is Rob's absolute least favorite Priest album. And if you read any of Rob's books, he'll say it a number of times that he really uh, doesn't like this record. But I think it's a great rock and roll record, to get back to your question. This was the first album I ever bought with my own money. Actually, I bought it on cassette. So in 1981, I would have been 11 years old. I already had British Steel. I had Screaming for Vengeance, and I had a best of Priest compilation. Um, which was the first two albums, Sad Wings of Destiny and Rock'n'Rolla combined. But that's another story. So this was the first album I bought with my own money. So I was stoked. I was excited. My mom drove us, me and my next door neighbor friend, who was a huge AC/DC fan. Anyway, my mom drove us down to Northridge Fashion Center, which was our local mall when I lived in Northridge, California. So I was so excited. I saved up. I got point of entry, and my friend got balls to the wall. So we came back with two classic albums. So I went and got my boom box. Had some batteries, probably running off 6D batteries. So I got my boom box and we went out front and sat on the curb. I remember this distinctly. And he put in Balls to the Wall. And I had never heard Accept before, and I had a argument with him because I'm 11 years old and I had heard AC/DC before, and to me, for whatever reason,
Mhm, mhm.
Udo sounded like a singer
Yeah.
for AC/DC, whichever one.
Mhm.
So in I'm saying, no, this is AC/DC, man. Just because I'm stupid. Of course, there's a huge difference between the two bands, especially musically. But I remember arguing with him about that. Then we put in Point of Entry, and I had heard Heading Out to the Highway before, um, on the radio, local radio in LA. So we got through that, and then the second track, Don't Go. And I didn't have MTV at the time, so I hadn't seen that video or anything. And I said, "Is this, the same band?" I didn't get it. Don't Go. To this day, I don't like the song. It just sounded weird. Um, it's stop and go. Uh, Never liked Don't Go. Never liked that song. Um, and then you get into Hot Rockin' after that, which is a hot rocker for um actually, I got this in '83, so I'm talking out my ass, but so I was 13. But anyway, um, so Hot Rockin' in my 13-year-old brain was I love that song. And then the rest of the album I just didn't get. I didn't get it. It wasn't Screaming for Vengeance because I had Screaming for Vengeance, so I didn't go in order in my purchasing. But anyway, I already had Screaming for Vengeance, and this wasn't metal to me. So I was really disappointed in the album. Since then, I love it. I think it's a top 10 Priest album in my book. I love the atmosphere. Uh, I love how happy it is. It's a real happy record. It's real rock and rolly. It's not a metal record. It's a rock and roll record, but it pumps you up, makes you feel happy, makes you feel good. Um, I really love the grooves. I love Desert Plains and Solar Angels. I think Solar Angels is one of my favorite pre-songs ever. Um, I love the driving bass from Ian. Ian's bass on this sounds really good. This is, in my opinion, Dave Holland's best work. He's very comfortable doing rock and roll. He's a lot more comfortable doing rock and roll or the mid-tempo stuff. You can tell throughout his catalog with Priest. But this this album he kind of gets into the groove because he likes the rock and roll groove, and I think this is Dave Holland's best work by far, with Judas Priest. And this is also my best sounding, my favorite production of the whole catalog. The whole
Wow.
Judas Priest catalog, Point of Entry is my favorite production because it's so crisp, it's so garagey. I don't know if it has to do with the Beats of Studio, but it's so crisp, and especially Dave Holland's drums. It just it has that garagey sound, uh, to me. Everything is so crisp. I mean, you don't have the whole really overly distorted guitars or anything like that. Like I said, it's a rock and roll album. But to me, the sound of it is just so crisp, especially the drum sound. I love the drum sound that Tom Allen got on this album. I think it's like I said, Dave Holland's best work. I love the sound of it. I love the drums. I love the production. That's
Awesome.
my story. I'm sticking to it.
Cool. So for me, this album starts off really slow. The first four songs, I don't like. Heading out to the highway, I heard it way too many times, and I try and avoid it, and I still hear it, and I still don't like it. Don't Go, Hot Rocking, Turning Circles, they're all crap songs. Um, and so
Tell us what you really think.
as I'm listening to this, I'm going, is this actually worse than Turbo? Like on the last week when I was listening to it, is this worse than Turbo? And then Desert Plains comes on, and then Soul Angels comes on, and those are both incredibly good songs. Um, John, you were mentioning with Parental Guidance about like uh, Halford singing about something and it just being in age inappropriate. I had the same idea with Hot Rocking. It felt to me like that song would have been better sung by the Matthew McConaughey character from Dazed and Confused, as just how inappropriate it was. So the second half of the album is much better. Once it hits Desert Plains, it's a very good album. The first four seem inauthentic. It seems like they were doing something for the record label or for they weren't doing truly good Priest material. They were just writing something for an album. So
Okay.
that's what I have to say about it. John.
All right. Well, I mentioned this came in at number 5 for me, and but I do like this record. If I gave a 0 to 10 ranking, Ram It Down would have got a 2 out of 10. Turbo probably would have got a 3 out of 10. I would give Point of Entry a 7 out of 10. And some of that might be because it was my second Judas Priest album. I had British Steel. I got Point of Entry at that point in time. Beggars couldn't be choosers. So I was just happy that, oh, wow, I've got another 10 Judas Priest songs. Now I have 20 Judas Priest songs to listen to. So I
Yeah.
wasn't as picky back then. I was just happy to have new stuff. I also mentioned earlier that I'm that guy in the room that likes Since You've Been Gone from Rainbow. Well, I'm that guy in the room that likes Don't Go. I think that chorus is just great. I love the video. I love the feel of it. I love Rob's delivery. Come on, now what you say? I love the way he sings that line. Love it. I've always liked Heading Out to the Highway. Kind of shocked that that song doesn't show up in their set list because it did get a lot of MTV. Probably it got the most MTV play from this record. Hot Rockin', I could take that or leave that. I like Turning in Circles. Like you guys have mentioned, Desert Plains and Solar Angels are just amazing. I, like you, say yes more than the average person. I think the chorus is fun in that. But this album really drops off for me then. All the way. I hate that chorus. You take it all the way. It's just way too like sing-songy. My little troubleshooter. That one's okay, but I still don't really care for that one. On the Run, I don't like that one either. So the album sort of runs out of gas for me. I agree with you, Jay, about the production. It is the drums sound great on this. It's got a really kind of bright in a good way, like shiny quality to this record. The guitars are very metallic sounding. The drums are really big sounding. You can kind of hear the bass by Judas Priest standards, that is.
Right.
So yeah, it's an album that I actually kind of return to it rather frequently because I'm maybe slightly burnt out on British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance, and you hear a lot of those. They play a lot of those songs live, so I kind of have fun with this album because again, I like the melodic stuff. To me, a song like "Don't Go," the lyrics are, yeah, it's not Dissonant Aggressor, it's not, you know, Savage or Stained Glass or The Ripper, but it's fun and I like it. I like catchy stuff, and I actually think Judas Priest is actually pretty good at writing melodic hard rock. That's what I would consider
Yes.
a lot of the stuff on here is melodic hard rock, and I think Judas Priest does a pretty good job of writing stuff like that. But it just because it runs out of gas on the last like 3 songs or so, I just can't rank it any higher than where it lands.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. So the next one is our biggest disagreement. So far, we've been in within one of each other on every vote.
Okay.
This one has the widest range. I ranked it as number one. John, you ranked it as number four, and Jay, you were wrong and ranked it at number five.
Mhm.
Tell us about Painkiller and why you're wrong.
I've been wrong a lot. I'm usually wrong. So Painkiller 1990, Chris Sangarides produced it. Uh, Marivelle Studios in France. It went gold, of course. Number 7 in Germany, number 13 Japan, number 29 Canada, number 26 UK, and number 26 Billboard in the US. This record was to be the last with Rob Halford for about 13 years. Also, the first with drummer Scott Travis, who is the drummer to this day. After using producer Tom Allen throughout the 80s, Priest wanted a fresh start, so they went with Chris Sangarides, who was the engineer on Sad Wings of Destiny. Priest deliberately wanted to go in a different direction to bring in the new decade and, according to Rob, to combat the music coming out of Seattle, which is interesting. Rob felt the band had maximum discipline and purpose and felt this would be a pivotal album and endeavored to make the strongest, most intense, and most powerful album of their career. And I got to say, they definitely succeeded in that. It's very powerful. Painkiller is a heavy banger. The album is heavy banger after heavy banger after heavy banger. Scott Travis announces his arrival with authority with the opening of the title track, Painkiller. And the record really melts your face off. It's a face melter.
Mhm.
Um, so, to answer your question, really, to me, it's a tale of sides, tale of two cities. It was the best of sides. It was the worst of sides. Uh, big surprise to no one who's been listening to the Priestcast. I'm not a big fan of the double bass drum or speed or thrash metal. Side one of this record is just a lot. It gets fatiguing to me. Um, it's just there's too much sonically. It's like a sensory overload. I mean, the songs are good if you hear them individually, but put together, the whole first side of the album is just it's too too much for me. I can't my brain can't handle it. I just get fatigued with the first side of this album. Um, I've never really been a fan of the song Painkiller uh, just because of that. It's too fatiguing to me. There's too much going on, sensory overload on that song, and Rob's voice. Although people love the song Painkiller, he's in that high register,
Mhm.
and that's probably my least favorite register for Rob. So the song Painkiller just gets too much for me. Side two on the record is Perfection.
You there? Hello?
We lost
I
him
can
there.
totally live. Yep.
We lost you
Hello.
for a second there. We all we got was side
Am I
two
still
is
here?
perfection, and then you froze on us. We thought that was your final
Oh, okay.
statement. Perfect. Yeah, so we lost you
Well,
after
yeah,
perfection.
I could totally leave with that. I think side two is perfection. Um, I love the aggression on the album. I do enjoy that. I'm thankful for that. Excuse me. But this album, when it came out, uh, it didn't the whole my whole story with the first side just being too much. It wasn't like that when the album first came out, because I was, a young kid and I had a lot of aggression. This album always takes me back to the first time I lived on my own. right after I graduated high school, stumbled around, got a job, got a roommate, lived in an apartment. So I was finally free. And this album always reminds me of that because I had my trusty boom box, and we used to set my boom box out and hang out and chill out with neighbors and such in front of our new apartment, which was really cool for us. We just turned 21, or maybe we weren't 21 yet, but right around that age. Um, excuse me. And so it always reminds me of that. So for that, it really has a special place in my heart, um, because of good memories, uh, and some bad memories because I was a bad kid, but mostly good memories. So uh, it always reminds me of that. But just the side one to this day is just a little too much for me. Just too much for my brain. Sensory overload. Side two, perfection.
Yeah, I see your point, but you're wrong. John, what what do you think about Painkiller?
Okay. So for me, this was number four, and basically the rest of my records are all nine or 10 out of tens. So it's really just splitting hairs at this point. Jay, I actually know where you're coming from, and that's kind of why it lands at number four on my list because there isn't a lot of variety with tempo and feel. It feels
Hmm.
like after Turbo and Ram It Down, they felt like they had to prove something, which they did, and they just put the pedal to the metal, and it really, they don't take their foot off the gas until we get to A Touch of Evil. That's like the only
Right.
time where, I mean, you're just getting hit with Painkiller, Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, Nightcrawler. They're just all in this same ballpark tempo wise. They're very like hard hitting, which is cool, and sometimes I'm in the mood for that, but I just prefer the albums that I ranked higher because they have more variety on them. But there's no doubt that this is, considering when this came out in 1990, maybe Priest was sensing that metal was going in a harder direction. Pantera is, I'm not quite sure where Pantera is at this point, but they're on the verge of pushing metal in a much more aggressive direction. Metal is thrash metal is already out there at this time, and that's very aggressive. So Priest really wanted to make a statement, and they certainly do. They make a statement on this that they can hang with the new kids coming up through the metal ranks, whether that be Scott Travis with his drumming right at the beginning, which to me is a statement, uh, and Glenn Tipton's guitar playing on this. Just the Painkiller guitar solo is just complete over the top, and I can't help but think it's Tipton saying, "Hey, I can hang with all you shredders out there." He obviously went and woodshedded and elevated his chops and everything so that he could be with all these guys that were playing a million miles an hour at that time. So everybody in the band elevates their game. Rob, you got death metal starting to come out around this time, thrash metal where the vocals are real aggressive, and Rob's like, "Hey, I can do that too. I can be aggressive with my vocals," and so you get that on various songs. So I do love this record, but it comes in at number four for me just because there isn't as much variety in the sound. And Jay, there are times, I agree with you, there are times where I listen to this where I do feel slightly fatigued with it. I just appreciate Priest when there's a little bit more variety on the record, but still an excellent 9 out of 10 album for me.
This is my favorite Priest album. It's my first Priest album, and it is still my favorite. It came out in September of 1990, and I think 2 weeks later, Rust in Peace came out, the
Mm.
greatest thrash metal album ever. So we have Priest showing that they can keep up with the state of the art thrash metal band. You mentioned the guitar solo to Painkiller. It's the first time, or yeah, to the song Painkiller. That's the first time I'd ever heard sweep picking,
Yeah.
and that's all over Rest in Peace in like literally every fucking song. The um, this was a statement that Priest not only was back, but they were leading again. They had stopped taking a backseat to
Mm-hmm.
whatever. This was an album they wanted to do. This was them going, fuck it, we are a metal band. They had lost the metal from that they had started. So I agree that the front half is very face meltery, just bang, 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 bang. First four songs are all kicking your ass. I like that. And I'm not generally, I want variety. Painkiller doesn't provide that. The first half of Painkiller does not provide it, but it doesn't matter because those songs are all so good. So that's my thoughts on that. Next up is an album John and Jay ranked as second best, and I ranked as fourth best. That's British Steel. Jay, what's give me some information about British Steel.
British Steel, 1980. Tom Allen produced it. Now, Tom Allen produced all the records through the 80s, and how they met Tom was he actually produced Unleash in the East, and they thought he did a bang bang job, so they went with him. Um, this is the first studio album with Dave Holland. Um, number 45 in Canada, number 69 in Japan, number 4 in the UK, which is awesome. Number 34 Billboard, uh, platinum twice. British Steel ushered in a new era, a new decade, and a new direction for Judas Priest. Gone were the prog elements of the 70s, and in were the more commercial, radio friendly, quick hitters. Priest also incorporated a new writing style, starting with British Steel. This was the first time Rob, Glenn, and KK wrote as a trio together in the same room at the same time. And this would continue throughout the 80s. Before, they'd write individually with a tape recorder wherever they were, in their hotel room, in their house, whatever. They'd get some ideas, put it on tape, get together, and then write the songs and kind of incorporate all their ideas. Well, this time they were in the same room at the same time, coming up with the same ideas. Um, so British Steel was written from scratch, actually. They had nothing when they went into the studio. They went in with a blank page and they wrote, performed, and recorded British Steel in 28 days. Now, they claim they didn't intentionally go in a more commercial direction, it just happened organically. Um, this was the first studio album produced by Tom Allen, who would end up producing all the Priest albums in the 80s. Like I said, Allen produced the live record Unleash in the East, and then he went from right from Unleash in the East into Def Leppard's debut, Into the Night, then back with Priest with British Steel. And he did those back to back to back to back in Ringo Starr's studio, which was the home studio that Ringo Starr bought from John Lennon. So they produced it there. Um, so I no, I did mention that it's Dave Holland's first um, record with
Mm-hmm.
Priest. Some quotes. Blueprint for classic heavy metal, says Scott Ian. British Steel was a statement of what heavy metal was because everything else had contained elements of blues. Rob Halford says, I think this is where we found our direction. Up until that, Up until that point, although we'd done well, there was a feeling in the band that we really didn't have a proper focus. And that's what Rob said. Um, and I love the record. Always have. The first song, pre-song I heard on the radio was "Living After Midnight." Wasn't the first pre-song I ever heard, but it was the first song I ever heard on the radio, and loved it. You know, I've heard it a billion times now, so I could live without it. But at the time, Priest was my band. You know, I was 10 years old, just getting into Priest, just getting into metal, and I I thought that Priest was part of my family. I thought I was in a very small group of people throughout the world that knew of this little British band. And and I felt that I was part of their family or something. I thought I was unique to the world, being on the cutting edge of this new band, Judas Priest, and I thought I was hot crap. Um, but and it always makes me feel that way, because that's where I came in, with Priest is with British Steel, so I always have that warm feeling. Um, British Steel was the fourth album I ever owned, and my mom got it for me when it came out, which I appreciated. And that time I had a really little piece of crap Sears and Roebuck record player. Um, with real crappy little speakers. I had the soundtrack to Grease. Uh, I had Cheap Trick live at Budokan, and I had Pink Floyd The Wall. And then I got British Steel from my mom. So those were the four albums I had for quite a while till I got Screaming for Vengeance and the other Priest compilation. So it holds a real part of my heart. But like I said, it's the first time they really kind of went in a commercial direction. You could kind of hear it with Hellbent for Leather, or they kind of changed.
Yeah.
The difference between Stained Class and Hellbent for Leather is remarkable. Um, in Hellbent, they went for the kind of the catchier, shorter, catchier songs. Um, and then it came to fruition really with British Steel, where it's 100% kind of the catchy stuff. Um, but really, Rob in his book Confess said that punk planted the seed for this record. The quick hitter. A lot of people say that it's because during the Hellbent for Leather tour that Priest opened for AC/DC, with the quick hitter songs, um, and the more radio friendly, more melodic stuff. Um, but I can't see in any of the writing, other than Martin's book, where he does mention that. But in all of Rob's writings and KK's writings, it really seems that they went in this direction, um, because of punk. It planted the seed for that, which is interesting. This is the first album with the whole where they have the whole aesthetic put together. They started with the leather and all that for Stained Class. And then, of course, you get Hellbent for Leather, and you get a dude Hellbent for Leather on the cover. Um, but this is the first time where it's really come together. They are leather, motorcycles, whips and chains, leather, the whole look, the whole aesthetic, the new metal look. They started the whole whips and chains, leather, metal look, and this is the first album that it really came together, and then everybody globbed on after that. Um, we've all heard all the songs on this album. Great album. We've heard the quotes, the blueprint for classic heavy metal, so, says Scotty. And so, yeah, I mean, it holds a good place in my heart. The songs are strong, real riff heavy. Love it. British Steel. Yep.
John, you also had it second best of the 80s albums. Why?
It could have been number one for me. It's my first Judas Priest record. The album cover is iconic. It's a breakout album for Judas Priest. I think it's their biggest seller, isn't it? Maybe right up there with Screaming for Vengeance. So I do love this record. Whenever I'm doing rankings like this, it's hard to not. I often wonder how much of it am I thinking about burnout factor, because this is a burnout factor album, an album that's a lot of these songs have gotten played a lot. I've heard it a lot. So that might factor into how why it landed at number two for me. But it's an iconic metal record. It sort of ushers in the 80s. You think about how many bands in 1980, especially bands that were from the 70s, they start releasing albums that are more focused, a little tighter. The production's a little cleaner. Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell. Ozzy releases Blizzard of Oz. Scorpions release not Love Drive. Animal Magnetism, I think, is 1980 for the Scorpions. I can't remember, but
Yep.
Scorpions are getting focused with their sound too, coming out of the 70s. So Judas Priest is right there with this. Great album. Rapid Fire, love it. Metal Gods, one of my favorite Judas Priest songs. When I saw them on the Painkiller tour, but when they got back together with Rob, I was so excited. I remember the first time I saw them, I think it was at Ozfest. Could it have been Ozfest the first time they toured when they got back together with Rob? Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
And they opened up with Hellion Electric Eye, which was amazing. And Rob was kind of in this elevated like walkway area, kind of in the back for all of Electric Eye. And when the song was over, Rob sort of disappeared, and there was all the smoke on the stage, and they go into Metal Gods. And Rob comes walking out of this door to the main part of the stage, and he's sort of doing this like shuffle thing, dun, da 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 dun, 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 dun. And when
Yeah.
he went
Yeah.
into that, we've taken too much for granted. I think I started crying in the crowd. I mean, it was just, this is just so cool, and I've always love that song and that memory of like the priest is back, baby. I just remember thinking Rob coming down, walking across the stage like that. It was just like, oh man, this is just so cool. Totally
Nice.
tired of breaking the law. Totally never really bought into living after midnight. Certainly don't buy into it now. Love Grinder. United is fun. I'm okay with that. I love the Rage, the Steeler. You don't have to be old to be wise. That was never my favorite song on this record. I think the title is just sort of awkward. But it's a classic album, and it was my first Judas Priest album, so all kinds of fond memories of this. It's a classic metal record. Uh, yeah, 1980. It's just one of these albums that sort of ushers in the metal sound of the 80s. So, but it comes in at number
Awesome.
two for me.
Yep. For me, it's the fourth. I like the album. I would rank it 8 or 9. It's a very, very good album. Um, a couple things. So when I listened to it this time around, I was like, okay, I'm not just going to hate Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight. I'm not. I'm going to listen to them for the first time. I'm like it's the first time. Breaking the Law doesn't have a guitar solo,
Nope.
and
Yeah,
that
you're right.
I'd never noticed that. That blew my mind. And then
It does.
another thing, I don't know if either of you have noticed it, but in the video for Breaking the Law, um, the deputy or where the police officer pulls out this paper cardboard guitar or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's a flying V, but the V is pointing up the headstock. It's inverted.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, I never thought about
I,
that.
I was sitting there going, "Oh my God, they have two guitarists. They would know better." So, that I like the album. Metal Gods is fantastic. Grinder is fantastic. United I like. What's the other one? Metal Gods, Rapid Fire. Perfect songs. Just great, great songs. Uh, I think it's a little bit overrated, but I didn't listen to this for the first time like really to like again the mid 2000s, like 2004, 2005. So it doesn't have any kind of emotional tie back to a certain time in life. I think I was like 6 when this album came out. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. So for the rest of these, actually tied with British Steel was Screaming. Um, if I have my notes right, goddamn Jeff, you knew better.
Do better,
Um,
man.
yeah, so Screaming, I have it as second. Jay, John, you have it at third. Jay, tell us about Screaming.
Let's see. 1982, eighth studio album, of course, Tom Allen. Screaming for Vengeance is the best selling of the catalog, double platinum. Billboard number 17, number 11 UK, number 12 Rolling Stones best 100 metal albums of all time. You Got Another Thing Coming is number 5 on top 40 metal songs ever. number 4 on Billboard Rock Chart. Screaming for Vengeance is Judas Priest's best-selling album of all time. Um, it was in the infamous Ibiza studio, Ibiza. How did we get through that record? I don't know. We were dancing with death, Rob says. There was a lot of cocaine, a lot of booze and shenanigans during the recording. Priests kind of had their tail between their legs after the disappointment of Point of Entry. They knew they screwed up on Point of Entry. They were determined to redeem themselves. Rob was determined to use vengeance in the title because he wanted to revenge an album he dislikes, Point of Entry. And they done good as it turns out. Like I said, their best-selling record, a true fan favorite, and along with the success of "You Got Another Thing Coming," getting heavy rotation, radio play, Priest once again became a headline arena act. The S Festival was also huge for them on the Screaming tour. So Priest had really regained the momentum they had after British Steel, and that they kind of lost that momentum after Point of Entry. Screaming for Vengeance was more than just Priest's breakthrough. It was a barometer for where heavy metal would go over the subsequent decade, and that is from Louder magazine. So Screaming for Vengeance, like I said, the second Priest album I got. Um, my mom, I when it came out, asked my mom for it because I was the biggest Priest fan in the world, I thought at the time, and Priests were part of my family, and I was the head of the Priest fandom, and no one else knew about this band, only me. I was in this little niche. That's still the way I felt. So she went and got me Scream for Vengeance. And while she was at the record store, she picked me up the Best of Judas Priest, which was a Gull record release of a combination of rock and roll and Sad Wings of Destiny. And I had never heard older 70s Priests, like Sad Wings of Destiny and rock and roll. So that really got me into the older 70s Priests. So um, that and 70s Priest to this day is my favorite. But back to Screaming for Vengeance, I mean, what can you say? That um a lot of people have this at the top of their list of the catalog, and I think it has a lot to do with the time they came into Priest. I think a lot of people, a lot of Priest fans, like we were mentioning, that a lot of Priest fans are older, right around our age. If you go to a Priest show, it's a bunch of old men like us. So I think a lot of people really got into Priest around that time because You Got Another Thing Coming came out, and MTV is out, and they were selling out arenas, us festivals, so they exploded. And I think a lot of Priest fans and fandom started with Scream for Vengeance, and I think that has a lot to do with why it's at the top of a lot of people's lists. To me, I think it's kind of in the middle of the discography for me. Um, I think it's a little overrated in my book, but Electric Eye, Riding on the Wind, Bloodstone. I mean, the first 3 songs are amazing. The riff for Bloodstone is just awesome. But then you have, songs like Chains, a Bob Halligan Jr. song, and I love the song, but it seems like it's a little tame for the record. Once you're coming off the first 3 songs, and then Pain and Pleasure, and down the line you have Fever, and those really, I don't care for Pain and Pleasure or Fever. I like Fever a little more than Pain and Pleasure, just because the so destiny has, but that little breakdown part, I love that part. Um, but it's just I don't think it's as consistent a record. as I'd like. I do love Devil's Child, the rawness of it. Um, it sounds like in the beginning when Glenn starts the you can kind of hear him. It sounds like he walks into a room and sits on a chair and presses record on a tape machine and just starts that. It's kind of raw. There's some guitar sounds in the beginning of that song that probably should have been cut out, but I love that they left them in. Um, and it's a great song, Devil's Child. The rawness of it, I just love. Um, but yeah, it holds a special place in my heart again because it's right around the time I came into Priest. You know, my mom got it for me, which was special. So, great album, Screaming for
Yep.
Vengeance.
I agree with you on Devil's Child. That's one of my favorites on the album. It's a great song, and I love the guitar crunch, and I love the passion with which Halford is delivering his lines. It's that is a fantastic deep cut off of that album. Um, I have Screaming as the second best of the '80s. It, it's the most consistent album for me that they've done in the '80s. It has five incredible songs: Hellion Electric Eye, Bloodstone, Pain and Pleasure. Sorry, Jay. Screaming for Vengeance, and Devil's Child. The only ones I really don't like are You Got Another Thing Coming. And even that, it's not the worst of their super commercial music. The one that really I just can't stand is Fever. I don't even see the point of that song. That's going to be a skip forever and forevermore. I don't want to listen to it again. All right, John, your thoughts on Screaming for Vengeance?
Okay, yeah, when I was thinking of British Steel, I was wondering British Steel ranked kind of high because of nostalgia, but it also maybe because of burnout took it down a notch. So maybe nostalgia and burnout cancel each other out. So there's some of that going on here with Screaming for Vengeance. There's definitely this was the first Priest album that I got that was current at that time. By the time I came into British Steel and Point of Entry, those albums had already sort of been out. So I was kind of there when Screaming for Vengeance came out. It is an album that a lot of times lands very high on people's lists for either Priest or heavy metal in general. And to me, it's always kind of like, whoa, everybody, let's put the brakes on for a second here and let's address the elephant in the room that is fever and pain and pleasure. And to a certain degree, maybe even take these chains. Uh, Fever is terrible. That whole fever. I mean, it just if this was a probably 79, they could have did a disco remix of it or something like that, and maybe it would have tore up the dance floor. I don't know. But the Hellion Electric Eye is one of the greatest album openers of all time. It's the greatest
Mhm.
concert opener of all time. I mean, when the lights go down and the Hellion kicks in, if you don't have a shiver up your spine, you're not a metal fan. Uh, Riding on the Wind is amazing. Bloodstone is amazing. I'm kind of okay with Take These Chains. I didn't like it as much when I was younger, but I do kind of like it now. Pain and Pleasure reminds me a little bit of Evil Fantasies from Hellbent for Leather. I don't know. It just never kind of worked for me. That middle section though in the song, like I think Jeff you mentioned, that is amazing. Screaming for Vengeance is great. I do like You've Got Another Thing Coming out of all the Commercial Priest songs. I do like that one. I kind of don't like the way they always drag that song out live and the singing along and everything. I already talked about Fever and Devil's Child is good, but to me it's a little bit always reminded me a little bit of Grinder. Like the opening riff is kind of like a Grinder type riff, and so it's kind of
Hmm.
like not as good as Grinder, but it's still a good song. So the album for me came in at number three because there are some really, really great songs on it, but then it just sort of gets dragged down by Fever and Pain and Pleasure and to a certain degree, Take These Chains. Another iconic album cover too.
Yeah, that's a
Definitely.
fantastic album cover.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the top, which is Defenders of the Faith. John and Jay, you agreed it's the best album of the '80s. I thought it was third, so I actually had it below Painkiller, then Screaming, and then Defenders. Um, Jay, Defenders. Defend your putting it first.
Well, 1984, of course, another Tom Allen. Billboard number 18, UK charts number 19, uh, platinum album. This is Ian Hill's favorite Priest record. So, coming off the historical success of Priest's best-selling album, Screaming for Vengeance, Priest was under some pressure to live up to the standard they set for themselves as the biggest metal band going. And they returned to Ibiza, Spain, to recapture the magic they struck with Screaming for Vengeance. Again, a lot of cocaine and booze was consumed during the recording of Defenders, um, along with problems with the condition of the studio. There's stories of broken limbs. There's stories of fistfights, all kinds of rock and roll shenanigans. Um, but I could talk about all that stuff forever. Um, but this album I always reach for. Um, and it's it's grown on me. Um, and it seems like out of all the 80s albums, I always reach for Defenders first. And I find myself reaching for it a lot. The way I sum up this album is sex and motorcycles. There's there's two themes to this album, sex and motorcycles. Um, I remember I got this on cassette. I always associate this record with moving to Fresno, California and starting high school. I always associate Defenders with The Warning by Queensryche and Iron Maiden's Power Slave. Those all came out around the same time. Um, and I had just gotten a new boombox that lit up and had, a double tape deck and uh so those three albums I distinctly remember getting me through the summer until I entered high school. So a lot of fond memories for me. The production sucks on this album. I don't like the production at all. I'm disappointed in the production. I love the songs uh, by virtue of where I have it. It's definitely a top five Priest album for me. Love the album, love the songs, but the production is just too compressed. It's too muffled, especially the drum sound. I think this drum sound, other than Ram It Down, which we've discussed, I think this drum sound on this album is the worst of the catalog. It's just so compressed and low. Um, it just seems like there's not a lot of effort. There's not a lot of I don't know if effort's the right word, but not a lot of enthusiasm with the drumming, and it's too compressed. It's too muffled. Um, but it it seems a little low energy for me, and I think that is just because of the mixing and the production. I think that's why it seems real low energy to me. But the songs are great. The atmosphere is kind of dark, and menacing, has a real dark atmosphere. The rough, fast motorcycles, the rough and violent sex, nightmares, heavy duty. The atmosphere is just off the charts. Rough and dark and heavy. Every song paints a picture in your mind, especially the Sentinel and Eat Me Alive. I mean, it's just you listen to those songs and you just see pictures going going along while you're listening. The atmosphere, I love the atmosphere of this record. Hate the production, love the atmosphere, love the songs, love the album. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. Top five Priest record, love it.
Awesome. John, your thoughts?
It was number one for me. It's a 10 out of 10. I agree with a lot of points that Jay made about. I actually like the guitar. I like everything about the production except the drums. The drums are so far back. They sound like a drum machine. And I've discussed
They
this
do.
with some drummer friends of mine, if this might have been a drum machine, or at this point, they might have just been doing like the kick and the snare are a drum machine and the toms and the cymbals are real. Uh, But that aside, there is sort of this darkness to this album that I really like. There was nothing on this album that was a particularly big hit. I mean, they had a video for Free Wheel Burning, but I don't remember it being played anywhere near as much as You Got Another Thing Coming or Breaking the Law. So there's, even though I've listened to this album a million times, there's no burnout factor on this. I remember first getting it, and I brought my Walkman to school with me because I had to just listen to some of it during lunch because I just couldn't go for 7 hours without, or whatever the school day was, without listening to Defenders of the Faith. I was just so into it. Every song is great, and it's also kind of a point too where I think Painkiller is a point where the band says, okay, we gotta like up our game here so we can compete with the rust and pieces of the world that's going on out there. I think they do the same thing here too. Like Glenn's guitar playing on Free Wheel Burning, his guitar solo is like the sweet, all the fast stuff and everything. He definitely elevates his game. Jawbreaker, great. Rock hard, ride free. That's one of my taglines at the end of my YouTube channel, along with Stay Heavy, Stay Metal. I also sometimes say Rock Hard, Ride Free. From this point on in high school, when I signed people's yearbooks, I would write my name and then write Rock Hard, Ride Free underneath it. So this was kind of like an anthem, life. You know how people have little affirmative life statements and like plaques that they hang on their walls. If that stuff existed back then, I would have, maybe my mom could have crocheted Rock Hard Ride Free and put it in a frame, and I could have hang it in my bedroom. It was sort of like a life credo for me. The Sentinel is just great. It's this epic, almost storytelling type of song. I love Love Bites. It's got that. I love when the last verse of Love Bites come in and there's those backwards vocals, so sort of coming in, and it's just, oh man, just love it. I love the feel of that song. Eat Me Alive, as what year did this come out? 80, 84, I think.
84. Yep.
84. As a 14-year-old, I didn't get any of these references in Eat Me Alive. When I heard Rod of Steel ejects, I'm thinking, oh, it's like that monster on the cover. He's like shooting things out at bad
Yeah.
guys, space guys. I
Yeah.
totally didn't get any of that. And some heads are going to roll. I love that. Night Comes Down. I wish Priest would do more. This is again like when I say like Painkiller. I wish there was a little bit more to the variety. Like Love Bites has got its own kind of weird feel. It got its own feel to it. Night Comes Down is maybe next to off of Hellbent for Leather, Before the Dawn. This is maybe
Hmm.
Night Comes Down is one of my favorite Priest ballads. Heavy Duty, again, another
Yeah.
song that has a different type of feel to it, that kind of united, everybody sing along type of thing. Defenders of the Faith, I just love the way the album ends there. I mean, Defenders of the Faith, there's a festival with that name in Germany. I mean, it's just like sort of this I'm proud to be a metalhead uh thing. It's just, yeah, we're defending the faith here. We're metal, we're proud. Uh I just love it. I just love the whole feel of the record. That I think everybody's playing is great on this, minus the drums. Uh Love it. It's just a great album. I have very fond memories of it. Again, Screaming for Vengeance was an album that I was aware of, but I was like waiting for Defenders of the Faith to come out, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And it was the album of 1984 for me. Just loved it. Yeah. So, and you know what, another point to make is, even with this bad drum sound and everything on it, when I was 12, 13 years old, I was just so happy to have this stuff. None of my friends were sitting around going, yeah, but there's just a little too much mid-range on this record. I don't like it. Nobody was saying that back
Yeah.
then because you were just happy that there was a new Judas Priest record out. And even when
Yeah.
stuff did start going a little haywire, like with Turbo Lover, Turbo and Ram It Down, I still couldn't quite figure out what it was. We weren't so picky about things back then. It was just kind of like, are the songs good? And this is a perfect example of it. The drums sound horrible on this record, but the songs are great. So it doesn't really matter. Great songs
Mhm.
trump bad production.
Right.
So love this record.
Agreed. This album is excellent. The the only thing about it is, there might be a little too much mid-range in it.
As this old grouchy old guy on the internet now. This is what the internet is for us to complain about podcasts, is to complain about there's too much 100K in the EQ band on this record.
Yeah, yeah.
I do agree with you. The drums are crap. I overlook it. The songs, as you said, John, they trump the production. Because the production isn't that bad. This isn't Redeemer of Souls level of unlistenability production wise. It's just the drums. Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, Sentinel. I'm glad you mentioned Love Bites, John. I love that song. It's one of my
Mhm.
favorite Priest songs. Night Comes Down is one of their best ballads.
Mhm.
Rock Hard Ride Free, great song. Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. I actually dig that one, and that's
Mhm.
so Eat Me Alive, I can take it can go away. I don't like Eat Me Alive, and I'm not that big on heavy duty Defenders of the Faith combo. It just doesn't do anything for me. It's not bad. It's not offensively bad. It doesn't hurt my ears to listen to it. It's just I don't like it. Um, Overall, I have it as third, and you guys have it first. I think Screaming edges it out by just a little bit. If Defenders is a 9.1, Screaming is a 9.2. So that's basically it. We're not, we're splitting hairs with, for me, we're splitting hairs between Painkiller, Screaming, and Defenders. British
Yeah.
Steel, I do have a notch down. Desert Plains, I have a notch below that. And then the other two, uh, uh, we just won't talk about them. So, John, would you like to summarize your rankings in any way?
Sure. I mean, I can just go. I was going from 7 to 1. I had Ram It Down, then Turbo, Point of Entry, Painkiller, Screaming for Vengeance, British Steel, Defenders. Like I said, 4 through 1. Uh, we're talking 9, like you said, 9.1, 9.2. We're splitting hairs. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's just outside of really the only th albums out of my 7 that I don't revisit are Ram It Down and Turbo. Otherwise, everything else, even Point of Entry, even though it comes in at number 5 for me, I do grab these records and I do listen to these, like to listen to these albums.
Mhm. Good. Jay, your summary of your ranking.
I had Ram It Down last, Turbo second to last, then Painkiller, Point of Entry above Painkiller,
Bad.
Screaming for Vengeance. I had British Steel number 2, and of course we just talked about Defenders. So,
Go.
yep.